My mother's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. She doesn't belong at this table. Every eye turned, forks froze mid-air, and I felt the weight of every year I'd been the family's shadow. I stood, each step away from them heavier than the last, but outside in the cold, my grandfather's cane tapped behind me. "Don't let them see you cry," he whispered, before walking back inside alone. Moments later, silence fell where laughter had been, and when I dared to look through the window, every smug face had gone pale. Something had just shifted forever. The laughter around the mahogany dining table still echoed in my ears, sharp and hollow, as though every chuckle had been rehearsed for an audience that never included me. My mother, Marianne Ward, leaned back in her chair, her wine glass catching the glow of the chandelier, and repeated words that felt carved in ice. "Rachel doesn't belong at this table." The hush that followed was worse than the sting itself. No one objected. Not my father, Gordon, whose fork trembled but never left his plate. Not my sister, Brooke, who smirked as if she had just been handed another crown. The cousins exchanged glances, then quickly buried their faces in food. The air was thick with complicity, and I realised yet again that silence was their favourite weapon. My throat tightened, the burn rising like fire, but I refused to let them see me break. This was their theatre, their stage, and I would not be their entertainment. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed back my chair. The scrape of wood against polished floor roared louder than any protest I might have uttered. Every eye followed me, not with pity, not with love, but with that peculiar satisfaction people get when the outcast finally leaves. My palms pressed hard against the edge of the table until my knuckles went white, and then I let go. The table. That long mahogany slab had been the altar of our family for generations. Deals were made on it, secrets whispered across it, alliances cemented beneath its polished surface. To them, it wasn't just wood, it was power, and every chair was a throne. And me? I was the guest who never belonged, the seat filler they tolerated until it suited them to erase me. Tonight was not the first time I'd been exiled. It was only the loudest. As I walked toward the door, my heels tapping on marble, fragments of memory slashed through me. The year I turned 12, the family portrait session, where the photographer gently asked, "Shouldn't Rachel stand in the middle?" Marianne smiled tightly and moved me to the edge of the frame. That photo still hangs in the main hallway, my body blurred into the curtains. At 16, I'd earned a scholarship to a leadership camp. A week later, Marianne announced Brooke would be attending instead. "It suits her image better," she said, while sliding the acceptance letter into Brooke's manicured hands. I was told I would get another chance. That chance never came. The table had always been their battlefield, and I was always the casualty. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday, the same ritual unfolded. Marianne presiding like a queen, Brooke her shining heir, Gordon silent in his corner, and me, the placeholder. Tonight, Marianne simply stopped pretending. Her words stripped away the thin veil of civility. I reached the threshold of the dining room, my hand grazing the polished frame of the door. Behind me, laughter stumbled back to life, as if my absence had been a relief, as if the problem had finally been removed. Their voices rose, forks clinked, champagne fizzed. In their world I no longer existed, but the weight of their rejection pressed down harder than ever. Each step toward the cold veranda felt like trudging through wet sand, dragging every memory of exclusion with me. The night air rushed at my face, sharp, bitter, unwelcoming. I clenched my jaw, swallowed the fire in my throat, and reminded myself, don't let them see you cry. I stood there in the chill, staring at the frost creeping along the stone path. My reflection in the glass door behind me was ghost-like, blurred by condensation. For 38 years, I had carried the role of the family's shadow, the daughter who could be forgotten without consequence. And tonight, with one sentence, Marianne had carved that role into permanence. Still, even as the tears threatened, I straightened my back. If they wanted me gone, I would leave on my own terms, not as the broken daughter, but as the woman they underestimated. Yet, deep down, I knew the truth. The ache of being cast out by your own blood never fades. It lingers, festers, and tonight it had reached its crescendo at that table I was never meant to claim. The night air wrapped around me like a shroud, prickling my skin with a chill that seeped deeper than bone. I had left the table, but the table had not left me. Its shadows stretched across the windows, across my chest, reminding me that exile was not an escape. Through the glass I caught the flicker of Brooke's smile, sharp, triumphant, a cruel little curve of lips she thought I wouldn't notice. For a moment my rage flared hotter than my shame. She had been waiting for this. She wanted me gone as much as Marianne did. Then I heard it. The steady, uneven shuffle of a cane on stone. Tap, pause, tap. The rhythm was deliberate, almost ceremonial. I turned, and there was Walter Pierce, my grandfather, shoulders bent with age, but eyes alert, piercing even in the half-light. His presence carried the same authority as when he'd walked into corporate boardrooms decades ago. The kind of authority that made men straighten their ties and swallow their excuses. He stopped a few feet away, his breath fogging in the cold, and said simply, "Don't let them see you cry." His voice wasn't harsh, but it carried steel, the kind forged in years of surviving betrayals far deeper than a ruined dinner. I bit my lip hard, forcing back the flood that wanted to betray me. My tears didn't care about dignity. They wanted release. But under his gaze, I managed only a small nod. He reached out one hand, resting it briefly on my shoulder. His grip was firm, surprisingly strong for a man his age. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward the dining room. I stood frozen, the imprint of his hand lingering like a brand. The shuffle of his cane retreated into the house, the sound swallowed by the hum of laughter that had reignited in my absence. And then came silence. Not the ordinary pause between conversations, but a silence that pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating, as if the air itself had been stripped from the room. Through the window, I saw it. Walter at the head of the table, standing instead of sitting, his cane planted like a gavel against the floor. Every eye turned toward him. Marianne's smirk faltered. Brooke's smile, so smug moments before, froze halfway and slipped into something closer to unease. Even Gordon, usually a statue of passivity, shifted uncomfortably, sensing the ground tilt beneath him. The cane came down once, hard. The sound reverberated across the room, a crack of thunder in a house too used to whispers. Plates trembled, a cousin flinched. For the first time in years, someone had broken their ritual of unchallenged cruelty. I couldn't hear his words, not yet. But I saw the effect. Faces blanched, champagne glasses stilled mid-air. The performance of superiority collapsed into something raw, fear, confusion, shame. And Brooke, my perfect sister, glanced quickly toward the door as if she knew that whatever storm Walter was unleashing, it had my name written at its centre. My breath hitched, but I stayed outside. This was no longer my role to play. For once, I wasn't the target or the victim. I was the witness to their undoing. Walter's eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept the room, and though I couldn't hear, I felt the weight of his words, like distant thunder rumbling through the glass. I leaned against the cold stone pillar of the veranda, trembling. My exile, I realised, was not the end of the story, it was the spark. The real reckoning had just begun, and the table that had defined my worth my entire life was about to be shattered by the one person I had never expected to fight for me. And as I pressed my palm against the frosted glass, I knew Brooke's cruel little smile was not the last thing I'd see tonight. The storm was only gathering, and the first bolt of lightning had already struck. The silence inside the dining room felt like a physical force pressing against the glass as I stood outside, watching. My grandfather, Walter Pierce, held his cane like a sceptre, his knuckles pale against the polished wood. His voice carried with the weight of authority forged over decades. And though I could not hear every word through the barrier, I could see the devastation ripple across the table. I pushed the door open slightly, the creak muffled by the carpet, and let the words wash over me. "Shame on every single one of you," Walter thundered, his eyes narrowing on each family member in turn. "To humiliate Rachel, my granddaughter, in this house, at this table, is beneath even the enemies I've faced in boardrooms and courts. You dare treat blood as if she were a stranger. Worse, you treat her loyalty as if it were worth less than your pride." The words cracked the air. Marianne stiffened, her fingers tightening around her wineglass, though she tried to keep her face composed. Brooke sat frozen, her lips parted in shock. Gordon shifted in his chair, guilt etched across his features, but no words came. The cousins who had laughed moments ago now stared down at their plates as though they could vanish into the china. Walter struck the cane against the floor. Crack. The chandelier trembled. "Do you even understand what you've done? Rachel was the only one who stood by me when I lay in the hospital last year, when doctors whispered about the end. Not Marianne, not Brooke, not Gordon. None of you." She sat through nights when my heart faltered, when my breaths came shallow, when death reached closer than life. She alone carried me back. I swallowed hard, my chest tight as I listened. His words were not just defence, they were an indictment. Marianne broke first. "Father, you don't understand." "Silence!" His roar cut her off, and the cane came down again. "I understand perfectly. I have watched your cruelty, your whispers, your poisonous laughter. I should have spoken sooner. Tonight I will not remain silent." Gasps fluttered across the room as Walter's next words landed like thunder. "Since you see fit to say Rachel does not belong, then hear this. She belongs more than any of you, because she is my heir. Every share, every property, every piece of this family's wealth, it will pass to her. Not to you, Marianne. Not to you, Brooke. Not to any of you who mocked her." The room fractured into chaos. Brooke's chair screeched backward, her face flushing crimson. Marianne's jaw dropped, fury and disbelief colliding in her eyes. Gordon stared at his father as though the man had just detonated a bomb in the centre of the table. The cousins whispered frantically, panic spreading like fire as they realised the balance of power had shifted in a single stroke. And then came the twist. The door to the hallway opened, and in walked a woman in a dark suit, carrying a slim leather portfolio. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor. She was calm, poised, and entirely out of place among the unravelling chaos. "Allow me to introduce Selina Hart," Walter announced, his tone sharp, decisive. "My attorney. She is here tonight to confirm what I've just declared." Selina inclined her head, her eyes scanning the table with professional detachment. She opened the portfolio, removed several documents, and laid them flat on the mahogany surface. The sound of paper sliding across polished wood was as final as the slam of a judge's gavel. "This," she said evenly, "is an irrevocable living trust executed 6 months ago. It names Rachel Ward as the primary beneficiary and successor trustee. The terms cannot be contested without extraordinary cause." Her eyes flicked to Marianne, then to Brooke. "And to be clear, petty grievances or bruised pride do not qualify as cause." The room stilled. Marianne's face drained of colour. Brooke's hand trembled against the tablecloth, her nails clawing at the fabric. Gordon looked down, defeated, as if the fight had already been lost before it began. For years I had been the shadow at this table. Tonight, the shadow had become the heir, and for the first time I saw fear flicker in their eyes. The room didn't stay quiet for long. Brooke shot to her feet, her chair toppling backward with a violent crash. Her face blazed crimson, and her voice, shrill with fury, cracked the fragile silence. "This is insane!" she screamed, her fists pounding against the table. "She hasn't done anything to deserve this. I've been here. I've carried the family name. I've earned it. Not her. Never her." The cousins flinched, startled by the venom in her tone. Marianne reached for her daughter's arm, urging her down, but Brooke shook her off and pointed at me with trembling hands. "You've always been nothing, Rachel. You don't have the strength, the vision, or the loyalty to carry this family forward. You'll ruin everything." Her words pierced, but what struck harder was the raw desperation in her voice. For the first time, Brooke wasn't just smug or cruel. She was terrified. Terrified that the pedestal she had built her identity upon was crumbling beneath her. "Sit down," Marianne hissed at her, though her own face had paled. Unlike Brooke, Marianne didn't shout. She adjusted her dress, smoothed the tablecloth, and forced her voice into calm, deliberate tones. "Father, you can't be serious. Rachel doesn't have the experience. She doesn't understand how fragile legacies are. You raised me for this. You trained me for this. Surely you don't intend to throw all that away because of sentiment." Walter's gaze cut across her like a blade. "This is not sentiment. This is survival. Rachel is the only one who has proven she understands loyalty. That is worth more than every polished facade you've constructed, Marianne." Gordon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between his father, his wife, and me. His lips parted as though to speak, but then closed again. His silence was louder than words. He was a man caught between loyalties he had never truly balanced. Walter slammed his cane against the floor, the sharp crack making even Brooke flinch back into her chair. His voice dropped, quieter but far more dangerous. "And let me make this clear to all of you. Rachel will decide who sits at this table. If she deems you unworthy, if she chooses to revoke your place, then you are gone. Permanently." Gasps rippled through the room. Heads turned toward me, eyes wide with disbelief and dread. The power I had never sought now burned in my hands like a torch, and I felt the heat sear my skin. My breath caught. This wasn't just inheritance, it was authority. A terrifying kind of authority that made my stomach twist. I hadn't spoken a single word, but the weight of their stares was crushing. They were no longer mocking me. They were watching me with fear, calculating how much of their future depended on my silence or mercy. Marianne broke the tension with a laugh, low, sharp, and humorless. So this is how you intend to dismantle your family, father, by placing it in the hands of someone too weak to lead and giving her the power to exile us like children misbehaving at dinner? Walter leaned forward, his eyes blazing. Not dismantle, rebuild. And if Rachel chooses to strip you of your seat, Marianne, then perhaps it is no more than you deserve. The words struck like thunder, reverberating through the walls of the house. Brooke's face twisted with rage, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. Gordon lowered his gaze, shame carved into the lines of his face. Then Walter reached into his coat pocket. From it, he pulled a small brass key, dulled with age, but glinting in the chandelier's light. He turned toward me, his cane steadying his steps as he walked closer. The table fell silent, every breath held as he placed the key into my hand. "This unlocks the safe in my study," he said, his voice firm but carrying a strange gentleness. "Inside, you'll find documents you must read when you're ready. Do not share them with anyone until then." The key felt heavier than metal. It was a weight of history, of secrets I didn't yet understand. My palm closed around it, trembling. Walter straightened, his eyes still locked on mine. "This is not a gift, Rachel. It is responsibility, and responsibility, unlike wealth, cannot be stolen. It must be carried." Behind him, Brooke's face burned with fury, Marianne's eyes narrowed with calculation, and Gordon stared at the tablecloth as though it could swallow him whole. But in that moment, none of them mattered. The key burned in my hand, and I realized exile had transformed into something far more dangerous: authority. The brass key felt like it was burning a hole in my coat pocket all the way home. Even as the night swallowed the quiet Connecticut streets, my mind buzzed louder than the car engine. Walter's words replayed over and over. "This is not a gift, it is responsibility." I had spent my entire life convinced I had none, that my place at the table was conditional, fragile, temporary. Now a key weighed against my thigh like a demand for permanence. When I entered my apartment, the silence felt different from the silence at dinner. It wasn't suffocating, it was empty, the kind of emptiness that left too much space for doubt to creep in. I set my coat down, pulled the key from my pocket, and walked straight to the corner cabinet where Walter's safe had been moved months earlier during renovations. The lock clicked open with unnerving ease as if it had been waiting for me. Inside was a thick manila envelope, its flap sealed with Walter's precise handwriting across the crease, "For Rachel when the time comes." My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside, instead of warm letters or sentimental heirlooms, I found photocopies, dozens of them. Receipts, transaction slips, wire transfers, each marked with the letterhead of the family's charitable foundation. At first, the figures didn't make sense. Large sums withdrawn, reallocated, disguised under vague project names. I scanned line after line, my stomach tightening. It wasn't philanthropy, it was siphoning. One page in particular made me stop breathing. It wasn't the amount, it was the signature. Not Marianne, not Brooke, Gordon. My father's handwriting was there, looped and unmistakable, pressed onto the line authorizing the release of nearly $500,000 from the scholarship fund into a shell account. The room spun, my throat closed as though someone had pressed hands against it. The one man I had believed too timid, too spineless to intervene, had intervened after all, but not for me. He hadn't spoken at dinner, hadn't defended me when I was shoved aside year after year, and now he was complicit in theft. The betrayal cut deeper than Marianne's cruelty or Brooke's mockery. Their disdain had always been overt, sharp like a knife you could see coming. But my father's betrayal was quiet, hidden in silence, disguised as neutrality. For 38 years, I had mistaken that silence for love, or at least for harmlessness. Now I knew better. My hands shook so violently I dropped the papers across the floor, receipts scattered like fallen leaves, each one whispering the same truth. My family was rotting from within, and the decay touched even the person I had clung to as a possibility of safety. I sank onto the couch, pressing my palms against my face. The words from earlier slammed back into me. Rachel will decide who sits at this table. How could I decide when even my father had chosen deceit? Images flooded me. 12 years old, standing at the edge of the family portrait. 16, watching Brooke wave my scholarship acceptance letter like a trophy. 28, sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria while Walter slept upstairs, waiting for anyone to join me. And always Gordon's figure in the background, quiet, unreadable, never intervening. I used to tell myself he loved me in his own way. Tonight, those excuses shattered. I gathered the receipts back into the envelope, each page heavier than the last. My heart pounded, my pulse loud in my ears. This wasn't just a trust inheritance. This was evidence that could unravel reputations, that could destroy what little unity remained. And now that power rested in my hands. But all I felt was hollow, and abandoned by the one person I had still been hoping might be different. The next morning, the envelope still sat on my coffee table like a live wire, daring me to touch it again. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my father's signature glared back at me, looping across the line of authorization. When the phone buzzed with a text from Selina Hart, my grandfather's attorney, I didn't hesitate. We should talk. My office, noon. By midday, I was seated across from her at a long oak desk, the papers spread between us. Selina adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable as she leafed through the receipts. Finally, she set them down, steepling her fingers. "You understand what these are," she said. I nodded, my throat dry. Fraud, theft, at the very least gross misuse of charitable funds. Her gaze softened slightly, but her tone remained steady. "Yes, and your father's signature is on more than one of them." I swallowed hard. "So he did it. He stole." Selina shook her head. "Not necessarily. From what I can tell, these were orchestrated transactions. Marianne has been manoeuvring the family's finances for years. Gordon may have signed under pressure, perhaps even under duress. But signatures are binding. Legally, he is as responsible as she is." Her words pressed into me like weights. My father, the man who had sat quietly at every dinner, the man who had let Marianne and Brooke cut me down without protest, wasn't just guilty of silence. He was guilty on paper. I pressed my palms to my eyes, the ache of exhaustion blurring my thoughts. If I expose this, he loses everything, his reputation, his position, maybe even his freedom. But if I don't... The siphoning continues, Selina finished. The scholarship fund empties. The foundation becomes a shell. The good your grandfather intended dies in their hands. The choice clawed at me. My heart screamed to protect what little tie I still had to my father, however broken. My conscience demanded justice, and beneath it all was the sickening realization that silence, his old weapon, had become my temptation too. Selina leaned back, studying me. "Walter trusted you with this, Rachel. He could have confronted them himself. He didn't. He chose you." I stared at the brass key lying on the desk, its dull gleam catching the light. My grandfather hadn't just passed me an inheritance, he'd passed me a trial. When I returned home, I dug deeper into the safe, searching for anything else he might have left. Beneath a stack of bond certificates and old ledgers, I found a slim black USB drive tucked into an envelope marked in the same sharp handwriting, "For Rachel only." My hands shook as I slid it into my laptop. Folders appeared, mostly financial backups, but one caught my eye. Drafts. Inside was a single unsent email addressed to me. "Rachel," it began, "if you're reading this, then you've already found what I left in the envelope. You must know by now the truth about Gordon. Do not hate him for his weakness. Hate only the silence that allowed it. You will be tempted to do the same, to bury what you know for the sake of peace. But peace built on silence is nothing more than rot beneath polished wood. I am asking you to do what I could not. Choose truth over comfort, even if it costs us." I reread the words until my vision blurred. Walter had known. He had seen the signatures, the siphoning, the rot spreading through the very foundation he'd built. And instead of acting, he had handed it to me, placing the weight of decisions squarely on my shoulders. My stomach twisted. Betrayed by my father, tested by my grandfather. Expected to carry the future of a family that had never truly claimed me. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. Walter hadn't given me a gift. He had set a trap, and the bait was my own conscience. I didn't plan the confrontation. It happened because the silence between us had become unbearable. 2 days after I found the receipts and Walter's unsent email, I drove to my parents' house. The familiar brick facade looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing, as if my perspective had shifted permanently. Still, when Gordon opened the door, I felt the weight of childhood all over again, standing in front of a man whose approval I had chased in vain. "Rachel," he said, his voice uncertain, like my name was something fragile. He stepped aside, and I walked past him into the living room. The house smelled faintly of polish and Marianne's perfume, though she wasn't there. I didn't sit. I didn't take off my coat. I dropped the envelope of receipts onto the coffee table between us. Papers spilled out, black and white evidence scattered like shards of glass. Gordon stared at them as though they were snakes. "You signed them," I said flatly. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Rachel, listen." "No." My voice cracked like a whip. "You listen. I spent my whole life thinking you were just quiet, that maybe your silence meant neutrality, but it wasn't neutrality, was it? It was compliance." His shoulders sagged, and for a moment he looked smaller, older. "Your mother, she pressured me. She said it was temporary, that it would be fixed before anyone noticed. I didn't want to fight her. You know how she is when she decides something. I thought..." He broke off, pressing a hand over his eyes. "I thought if I just signed, it would keep the peace." The words detonated inside me. Peace. That word had been the excuse for every bruise left by Marianne's sharp tongue. For every time Brooke shoved me aside. For every hollow seat I'd occupied at the table. He had sacrificed me on the altar of peace his whole life. And now he'd sacrificed the foundation too. I took a step closer, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "You think silence is harmless, but it's not. It's a weapon. Every time she cut me down and you said nothing, every time she erased me and you looked away, you weren't protecting peace, you were choosing her. And now I know it wasn't just me you abandoned. You abandoned integrity. You abandoned the very thing Grandpa built." Gordon's eyes filled with tears, his mouth quivering. "Rachel, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you?" My words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't pull them back. "You let her destroy me in this family. And now I find out you let her destroy his legacy too. You signed away more than money, Dad. You signed away trust. You signed away the one thing I thought I still had with you, that maybe, deep down, you were on my side. He reached for me, his hand trembling, but I stepped back. The distance between us felt cavernous. I had never wanted him to shout, to rage, to fight battles for me. I had only wanted him to stand, just once, to say no, to choose me. Instead, all I had was his apology, thin and empty, rattling against the hollow of decades. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I avoided conflict, we could survive, he whispered. But I see now I was wrong. My silence did more damage than her cruelty. The admission hung between us, heavy but too late. My chest burned with grief and fury, but there was no relief in hearing him say it, no catharsis. Only the confirmation of what I had already known. He had betrayed me, not through malice, but through cowardice. I gathered the receipts back into the envelope, shoving them inside with shaking hands. You don't get to ask me for forgiveness, I said, my voice low. Not when you never gave me protection. He crumpled into his chair, shoulders bowed like a man crushed beneath invisible weight. I walked to the door, my boots striking the hardwood with a finality that echoed like a verdict. I didn't plan to see Marianne that night, but rage has a way of driving the body before the mind catches up. After leaving Gordon slumped in his chair, I found myself in the same house only an hour later, standing at the doorway of the study where she sat with a crystal glass in hand. She didn't look surprised. "Rachel," she said smoothly, as if she'd been expecting me. "I wondered when you'd come." The calm in her tone fanned my fury. I dropped the envelope of receipts on the desk between us, the sound sharp against the wood. "How long have you been using the foundation as your personal bank?" Her lips curved, not in shame, but in amusement. "So you've seen the papers. Your father was supposed to keep them hidden." I flinched at the word, supposed. She swirled the wine in her glass, her nails painted blood red, and leaned back. "Rachel, you were never meant for this world. You don't understand what it takes to keep a family's name powerful. Sacrifices must be made." The word sacrifice struck me and I spat back. "Sacrifices? You sacrificed me, my childhood, my dignity, everything, for Brooke." For the first time her expression flickered. She set the glass down, her fingers tightening. "Yes," she said finally, voice low but steady. "I did." The admission stunned me. My breath caught as if the room itself had been sucked dry of air. She leaned forward, her eyes hard and unflinching. "You think I don't remember that scholarship? The one you earned when you were 16? I buried it. I made a call, pulled strings, and handed it to Brooke. She was the one with promise. She was the one who could carry us. You..." Her lips thinned. "You were never strong enough. I did what had to be done." The words gutted me more than if she had screamed. For years I had suspected, wondered, even whispered the possibility to myself in lonely nights. Now the truth was here, spoken aloud without shame, without regret. "You destroyed me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "No," she said sharply, "I saved this family, and Brooke deserved it more than you. She always has." The finality in her voice cracked something inside me. My legs felt weak. I had thought the betrayal couldn't go deeper than Gordon's cowardice. But this was different. This was deliberate, a mother's choice to elevate one child by erasing another. I turned away, unable to meet her eyes, when a voice cleared softly behind me. I hadn't noticed my cousin Elaine, standing in the doorway, her face pale. She had probably heard every word. "Rachel," Elaine said gently, her eyes darting to Marianne. Don't think you're alone in this. Do you know why she does this? Why she ruins you to lift Brooke. Marianne's head snapped toward her niece, fury sparking in her gaze. Elaine, don't! But Elaine pressed forward, her voice trembling with anger, because she lived it. Do you remember, Aunt Marianne, how your husband's family treated you? How they left you out of gatherings, mocked your accent, made you feel like you were nothing. You hated it. You swore you'd never feel that powerless again. And now you've done the same thing to Rachel. The words struck me like a second blade. My mother, my tormentor, had once been me. A woman shoved aside by her own in-laws, ridiculed, forced to fight for scraps of belonging. The cycle had repeated, but instead of breaking it, she had embraced it, passing the poison down to me. Marianne's face hardened, but her silence was louder than denial. Her eyes dropped for just a second, betraying a flicker of truth before she composed herself again. I stared at her, my chest heaving. You knew what it felt like, and you still did it to me. Her lips parted, but no apology came, only the same cold steel I had known all my life. The room blurred around me as tears stung my eyes. The rage, the grief, the weight of legacy, all of it pressed against my ribs until I could hardly breathe. I had come here seeking answers, maybe even some shred of remorse. Instead, I walked away with confirmation. Marianne hadn't just chosen Brooke over me. She'd chosen to repeat the cruelty she once suffered. And in doing so, she had bound me to a chain of rejection generations long. It began with whispers, then with headlines. Within a week of Walter's announcement, the town of Fairview was buzzing with a story that wasn't mine, but had been forced onto me like a stain. The first article appeared in the Fairview Gazette. Estranged daughter seizes family wealth. Beneath it, a photo of me leaving my apartment, my expression tense, captured by a camera I hadn't noticed. By the second day, Brooke's hand was obvious. She had fed the press the narrative, dripping poison into their eager pens. That I had manipulated an old man into rewriting his will. That I had exploited his illness to seize control of the trust. The words spread like wildfire, each repetition reshaping the town's perception of me. At the grocery store, neighbours who once offered polite smiles now turned away. A colleague at the community centre, where I had worked for years, asked if the rumours were true. Did you really cut the rest of your family out? Even strangers online found their way into my inbox, calling me greedy, opportunistic, heartless. I wanted to scream, to remind them of the years I had spent invisible, of the nights at the hospital no one else had endured, of the decades of silence I had carried like a chain. But words don't matter when lies are easier to believe. The breaking point came one afternoon when I walked into the coffee shop near my apartment. Two women I vaguely recognised from the neighbourhood fell silent the moment I stepped in. Their eyes scanned me head to toe before one muttered just loud enough, "There's the daughter who stole everything." The cup trembled in my hand. My throat closed. For 38 years I had been the invisible one, erased by my own family. Now, suddenly, I was visible in the worst way, painted as a villain for daring to exist outside their script. Back home, I shut the blinds and collapsed onto the couch. My phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications piling up. I forced myself to look. The local news site carried Brooke's carefully rehearsed statement. I love my sister, but it breaks my heart to see her take advantage of our grandfather's declining health. This isn't about money. It's about respect for family. Respect for family? The hypocrisy made bile rise in my throat. Respect had never been given to me, not once. Now she wielded the word like a sword, slicing my name apart in the public eye. The comments beneath the article were worse. Classic opportunist. If she cared about her family, she wouldn't take everything for herself. Brooke has always been the shining one. Of course she deserves it. Each word dragged me lower until I felt the same suffocating weight as when Marianne had declared I didn't belong at the table. Different battlefield, same verdict, exile. By evening, my inbox overflowed with reporters requesting interviews. One email in particular made me freeze. It wasn't from the press. It was from a board member of the foundation itself. Given the circumstances, we'd like to discuss whether you're fit to serve as trustee. The walls seemed to close in. Even the institution my grandfather had entrusted to me was starting to question. Brooke's smear campaign wasn't just damaging my reputation, it was threatening the legacy Walter had handed over. I pressed my hands against my temples, fighting the spiral of panic. For years I had prayed to simply belong. Now that I had been thrust into the centre, all I wanted was to disappear again. But the choice was gone. I was no longer invisible. I was a target painted with bullseyes by my own sister. And the worst part was knowing that it was working. For the first time since Walter placed the key in my hand, I wondered if I could carry it at all. The storm outside finally matched the storm inside me. Rain lashed against my apartment windows, streaking the glass with crooked rivers. I sat on the couch, half numb, staring at the unread messages piling into my inbox. Brooke's smear campaign had worked. In the eyes of Fairview, I was a vulture circling over my grandfather's fortune. Then the phone rang, not a reporter, not Selena. It was Gordon. His voice cracked through the line, ragged with urgency. "Rachel, you need to come to the hospital. It's your grandfather." I was on my feet before he finished. By the time I arrived, the air in the intensive care unit smelled of antiseptic and dread. Machines beeped softly beside Walter's frail body, his chest rising and falling with painful effort. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, his sharp presence dulled by oxygen tubes and the weight of years. For the first time, fear coiled inside me, not of losing his approval, but of losing him altogether. Gordon stood by the window, his shoulders hunched. When he turned, his eyes were red-rimmed, his face aged a decade in hours. Without a word, he pressed a small black USB drive into my hand. This has everything," he whispered. "It proves what Marianne and Brooke have been doing. The house in Ridgeview, the accounts, the false invoices. They used the foundation's money to build their empire, not just scraps, Rachel, millions." I stared at him, the plastic casing biting into my palm. "Why are you giving this to me?" His voice cracked. "Because I don't have the courage. I never did. But you, he trusted you, and if something happens to him tonight, you'll be the only one left to stop them." The words carved into me like glass. I looked at Walter, his breaths shallow, his skin pale, and felt the weight of the choice pressing down. The USB wasn't just proof, it was a weapon. With it, I could burn Marianne and Brooke's lies to ash, reveal their greed to the world, and strip them of every last shred of influence. But at what cost? If I released it, Marianne would lose everything, her reputation, her social standing, perhaps even her freedom. Brooke, too, would be exposed as complicit, her carefully polished image shattered beyond repair. They would become pariahs, branded thieves, disgraced not only in Fairview, but far beyond. And it would be my hand holding the torch. For years, they had painted me as nothing. Now I had the power to erase them in return. But as the storm raged against the windows and the machines hummed beside Walter's fragile frame, the question hollowed me out. Would justice make me their mirror? Would I become the executioner of my own family? I sank into the chair beside his bed, the USB heavy in my palm. Memories clawed through me, Marianne's voice declaring I didn't belong at the table. Brooke's smirk as I walked away. Gordon's silence, the receipts bearing his signature, the scholarship stolen, the photograph with me blurred into the curtains. And then another memory, Walter's unsent email. Choose truth over comfort, even if it costs us. Tears stung my eyes as I looked at his hand lying limp on the sheet. He had carried the weight of this family his whole life. Now, when he could no longer speak, he had passed it to me, not to punish, but to decide. I clenched the USB until the edges dug into my skin. Justice or mercy, legacy or blood, truth or silence. The scales swayed violently, no choice without devastation. The storm outside thundered as if demanding an answer, but I could give none, not yet. All I knew was that whichever path I chose, there would be no turning back. The storm broke 2 days later, not in the sky, but in a conference room lined with dark panelled walls and framed degrees. Selina's office smelled of leather and paper, its air taut with expectation. Around the long, polished table sat the fractured pieces of my family. Marianne, with her arms crossed, Brooke bristling with barely contained fury, Gordon sunken into his chair like a man awaiting sentencing, and several cousins who had been silent spectators until now. Selina sat at the head, poised like a judge. Beside her, I held the USB drive inside my pocket, the brass key still tucked into my bag. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to speak first. "This table," I began, my voice low but steady, "is not the same one you humiliated me at. This table has new rules." Marianne scoffed, leaning back. "You think you can lecture us into submission?" I ignored her. "There are 3 conditions if you want any seat in this family's future. 1, full restitution. Every cent siphoned from the foundation is to be returned with interest. 2, a public apology, not just to me, but to the community whose trust you betrayed. 3, labour. You will commit to service work in the very programs you stole from. You'll face the people you robbed." Brooke shot up, her chair scraping violently. "This is absurd. You have no right to demand any of this." Selina's voice cut like glass. "Actually, she does, legally and morally. Rachel is trustee. She holds the authority to enforce these conditions or remove you from the board entirely." Brooke's mouth snapped shut, her eyes narrowing into venomous slits. Marianne, however, leaned forward, her lips curling into a cold smile. "You sound just like your grandfather," she said, "setting ultimatums, pretending righteousness. But you forget, Rachel, no one respects a weak leader. They'll see this for what it is, vengeance dressed as justice." My chest tightened, but I kept my gaze steady. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll see what Grandpa saw, that silence breeds rot, that a family built on cruelty isn't a family at all." The room bristled with tension, but then something unexpected happened. My cousin Elaine, who had overheard Marianne's confession weeks earlier, cleared her throat. "She's right," Elaine said, her voice trembling but firm. "I've stayed quiet too long. I saw what you did to her, Aunt Marianne. I heard you admit it. Rachel isn't taking vengeance. She's giving us a chance to be better." The words stunned the room. Marianne's eyes narrowed to daggers. Brooke sneered, but Elaine wasn't alone. 2 other cousins, usually neutral shadows at family events, nodded in agreement. Twist 9 had arrived. Neutrality was crumbling. Those who had once watched silently were were beginning to take sides, and it wasn't Marianne's side they were choosing. Brooke's fists slammed against the table. Traitors, you've always been jealous of me. Now you're siding with her. Elaine didn't flinch. We're siding with truth, something you wouldn't recognize if it hit you in the face. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Accusations, denials, sneers. Selina struck the table with her palm, restoring order. Enough. Rachel has made her terms clear. You can accept them and remain, or refuse, and be cut off entirely. The choice is yours. Marianne's face twisted, but she didn't respond. Brooke paced furiously, muttering under her breath. Gordon sat with his head in his hands, caught between shame and silence. And me, I sat straighter, the weight of the USB pressing into my pocket like a reminder. I had the nuclear option, but I wasn't wielding it yet. This wasn't destruction, this was rebuilding, one condition at a time. And for the first time, the power dynamic at the table tilted. Not because I demanded it, but because others chose it. My family, piece by piece, was starting to see that cruelty could no longer sit unchallenged. The shouting finally ebbed, leaving behind a brittle quiet that hummed with tension. My pulse pounded, but I knew this was the moment. I rose from my chair, my palms pressed flat against the polished wood, and let my voice cut through the silence. Enough, I said. From this moment on, the question of who sits at this family's table is mine to answer. Not Brooke's ambition, not Marianne's control, mine. The trust gives me that power, and I will use it. Every eye turned to me. Brooke seethed, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might crack. Marianne stared, her hands folded, but her eyes sharp as knives. Gordon lifted his head at last, sorrow flickering in his expression. I drew a breath, steadying myself. But let me be clear. This isn't about vengeance. It's about rebuilding. Some of you have already chosen truth. Some of you still cling to lies. So here is how it will be decided. The seats at this table are not permanent. They can be earned or they can be lost. A murmur rippled through the room. I continued. Those who stole will repay. Those who mocked will repent. Those who stayed silent will choose whether to keep hiding or to stand. And every action, every choice will decide if you remain. From this point forward, every chair must be deserved. Marianne's lips curved into a bitter smile. So you crown yourself judge now? No, I said firmly. I crown myself responsible. Grandpa trusted me with more than money. He trusted me with the future. That means I have to choose not who flatters me, not who fears me, but who proves they can change. Then I did something none of them expected. I gestured to the end of the table, where one chair remained vacant. This chair stays empty, I declared. It belongs to no one, and yet it belongs to anyone. Whoever dares to change, whoever dares to face the truth and do the work, there will always be a seat waiting, but only if they earn it. The words shifted the air. Even Brooke froze, thrown off by a vision she hadn't anticipated. This wasn't the revenge she had warned the world about. It was something more dangerous to her pride, mercy on condition of transformation. Elaine's eyes softened, tears brimming as she whispered, "She's building something new!" Two cousins nodded, their gazes meeting mine with something close to respect. Brooke, however, shoved her chair back, her voice breaking. "This is pathetic. You think keeping a seat empty makes you righteous? All it proves is you don't have the strength to cut us out completely." I looked at her, steady. Maybe, or maybe it proves I'm not you. The sting landed. Brooke's face twisted, but she didn't answer. Selina broke the silence. Her voice, calm, but edged with approval. You've heard her. The rules are set. This mediation is concluded. The family dispersed in fragments, muttering and glaring, but the seed had been planted. They could fight it, deny it, despise it, but they couldn't ignore it. The empty chair haunted them as much as it anchored me. Later that night, I sat in the hospital beside Walter again, his breaths slow but steady. I told him everything, how Brooke raged, how Marianne sneered, how some cousins had chosen to stand with me, and when I described the empty chair, his lips curved faintly beneath the oxygen mask. "You didn't choose revenge," he whispered, his voice faint but resolute. "You chose to rebuild." I squeezed his hand, tears blurring my vision. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." His fingers tightened weakly around mine. "You already are." For the first time in weeks, my chest eased. The weight of hatred, humiliation, and betrayal shifted, leaving room for something fragile but real: hope. 6 months later, the house looked the same, but the air inside carried a different weight. The mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier's light, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen. Yet the echoes of the past, of laughter turned to knives, of silence weaponized, no longer ruled it. This was no longer Marianne's stage, nor Brooke's throne. Tonight the table belonged to me. The family gathered hesitantly, fewer than before. Elaine sat near the middle, her posture calm but proud. 2 cousins, who'd once hidden behind neutrality, now chatted quietly, their voices light, testing the possibility of peace. Gordon, my father, sat at the far end, not in authority, but in humility. For months, he had worked at the community centre, sorting donations, cleaning floors, listening to the children he had once ignored. He bore no illusions of redemption, but his hands were busy at work, and for the first time he was present. I lifted my glass, the contents sparkling golden. "To new beginnings," I said softly. A ripple of agreement travelled down the table, tentative but real. The Foundation's scholarship fund had grown stronger in the months since restitution began. Students who had once been denied now had opportunities waiting for them. I recounted to the family the stories I'd heard. A young nurse training because tuition was finally covered. A first-generation college student sending home photos of her dorm room. The table listened, and though not everyone smiled, no one sneered. The absence of Brooke was palpable. Her chair sat empty, returned money sealed her debt, but her presence had evaporated from Fairview. No letters, no phone calls, only silence, the kind that carries finality. In truth, I didn't know if she would ever return, or if she wanted to. Marianne's absence felt heavier still. She hadn't attended, but a letter arrived in her careful handwriting, the envelope resting unopened beside my plate. My fingers itched to tear it open, to demand what apology or dagger lay inside, but I wasn't ready. Some wounds need time before they can be read. Gordon's eyes flicked to the envelope once, then away. He didn't ask, didn't push. His penance was his silence, now. Not as avoidance, but as space. As the meal stretched on, laughter returned, but a different kind, softer, hesitant, like a language relearned. It wasn't the brittle laughter of superiority, but something closer to relief. And though I knew the cracks were still there, though history couldn't be erased, I felt the table shifting beneath us. It was no longer a weapon, it was becoming a bridge. At one point, Elaine leaned across to me, her eyes warm. "This feels different," she whispered. "It is different," I answered, "because this table doesn't belong to the cruel anymore. It belongs to those willing to change." She nodded, her gaze sweeping the room, and in that moment I believed it too. When the plates were cleared and the candles burned low, I sat back in my chair, exhaustion mingling with a strange contentment. For 38 years, the table had been my enemy, the stage of my humiliation. Tonight, it was simply a place to gather, to share food and words, and maybe, just maybe, to begin again. I looked at the empty chair at the end. Brooke's absence shouted louder than her presence ever had, and beside me the unopened letter from Marianne glared like an unanswered question. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, uncertainty didn't terrify me. The new table wasn't perfect, it wasn't whole, but it was mine. The letter sat beside my plate all evening, its weight heavier than any dish. Long after the family had gone, long after Gordon had helped clear the last glass, and Elaine had hugged me tightly before slipping out into the night, I remained at the table. Candles burned low, their flames trembling as though hesitant to die. The envelope lay untouched, its edges catching the light. At last I picked it up. My fingers hesitated, tracing the handwriting that was as familiar as it was foreign. Marianne's script, precise, elegant, as if even her words demanded perfection. I slid a knife beneath the flap and unfolded the letter. "Rachel," it began, "you think I don't see you, but I always have. I pushed you away, not because you were weak, but because I feared the day you would grow strong enough to leave the table I built. I needed control. I needed to believe I could shape this family, that I could decide who mattered. The truth is, I was terrified of you. Terrified that you would become what I never could, a woman who belongs without permission." My breath caught, the words blurred as I read on. "I won't ask forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But know this, my cruelty was fear in disguise. And fear has ruled me for too long. If you are wise, you will not let it rule you." The letter ended there, no apology, no declaration of love, just an admission, raw and unsettling. She had feared me, not hated me. I laid the paper flat on the table, my chest tight, with emotions I couldn't name. Grief, anger, pity. A strange, hollow ache for what might have been. Slowly, my gaze drifted to the empty chair at the far end, the one I had promised to keep vacant. It was more than a symbol now. It was an invitation. A reminder that change, however unlikely, was always possible. Maybe one day Marianne would walk through that door and sit there, not as a queen demanding loyalty, but as a woman stripped of her illusions. Maybe not. The choice would be hers, but the chair would wait. I leaned back, letting the silence settle. For the first time in my life, the silence at this table wasn't suffocating. It wasn't a weapon. It was peace. And then it struck me, clearer than the candlelight, sharper than Marianne's letter. The old table was dead. The table that had been built on cruelty, hierarchy, humiliation. It had crumbled the night Walter slammed his cane and declared me heir. It had rotted long before beneath the polished veneer of mahogany. But tonight, staring at the empty chair, I realized something else. I hadn't just inherited a table. I had built a new one. This table wasn't defined by who could be humiliated into silence. It wasn't measured by favoritism or fear. It was shaped by choice, by restitution, by courage, by the possibility of redemption. It was my table, but not only mine. It was a table anyone could belong to if they dared to change. I folded Marianne's letter and set it beside the empty chair, a silent acknowledgement that the door remained open. Not because she deserved it, but because I refused to become her. As I stood extinguishing the last of the candles, my reflection shimmered in the polished wood. No longer the blurred girl in the corner of the family portrait. No longer the outcast erased from memory. I saw a woman who had been broken, humiliated, and discarded, and who had chosen, instead of revenge, to redefine what family meant. The satisfaction that rolled through me was not the bitter triumph of conquest, but the steady fire of transformation. From exile to belonging, from silence to voice, from ruin to rebuilding. The old table had ended, the new table had begun.